Hello there and welcome Virtual Space Hero community. It is a tremendous pleasure to be back online this week. You know that we had in the last 3 weeks a few breaks in between our live shows. So nothing better to be back on the stage here with a very important topic. We have been talking about hybrid teams, about virtual teams and remote work for the past years here on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn live stage. Tonight, we are going to talk about how to make it visible. What we do know is from research and also from our practice is that many managers were struggling a little bit when they were not able to see their teams, right? So this is on one hand, a little bit a challenge because we do know that trust and also trust in what and how everyone is doing his or her task or fulfilling his or her task is very important for the virtual space. And therefore today we're going to talk about not only working out loud, but also visible teamwork. You remember working out loud, we were very honored because last year we had John Stepper here with us talking about working out loud and how it's how it's important for virtual teams to work out loud. And today we're going to talk to Pilar Orti and Maya Middlemiss from Virtual Not Distant about visible teamwork. So let us know before I ask Pilar and Maya onto the stage, let us know where you're connecting from and also how visible is your work. Just use the chat feature on whatever channel you're joining us from and let us know how visible do you feel you are being a remote worker if you are. And with that, happy and welcome to Pilar and Maya. There they are. Hello there.
Hello.
Hi, great to be here.
Hi to both of you. It's fantastic having you with me. I enjoyed so much reading through your article about visible teamwork when I discovered it. And it's really fun because Maya, we were just talking, we connected last year and we are so close, even physically close, right, Maya?
Yes, we are. We haven't managed to work together virtually, but we are just down the road from each other. So
absolutely. It's like half an hour car drive between us. Anyways, I would love to talk about Virtual Not Distant and your framework for visible teamwork. So Pilar, maybe let us know a little bit on how you met. Did you meet virtually or did you meet in presence? And how did you come up with the Virtual Not Distant webpage and your company?
So yeah, Maya and I met some years ago through a Facebook group. Would you believe it? many years ago. And so we met. We also met. We had a coffee in London and everything then. So we stayed in touch. And the whole Virtual Not Distant concept, it was first a blog and then it became a company. And this was really about seeing that in the space, more people were starting to work virtually, remotely, and that there was not a lot of literature around and a lot of information on how to run a virtual team. So the blogs that were all about ordinary leadership were not getting much traction, but the posts that were about working in a virtual team, etc., were gaining traction. So I thought there's a space there. There's also the thing that a lot of HR people are very people. So there was still that discovery that you can do a lot through technology, that you can connect in a human way through technology. So that's where Virtual Not Distant came from.
Yeah, and it's great so that you also met virtually. Sorry, Maya. It's really great that you also met virtually. Maya.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to say all this happened in the before days. All of Pilar's work in setting up what started off as a blog, then turned into a business, was all very much in the pre-pandemic days when working virtually was less common, but was already most definitely gaining momentum, and more people were wanting to explore what it had to offer them long before they were forced to, when everything changed.
Absolutely. So when was that? When did you meet for the first time in the Facebook group?
Oh goodness, that was a lot of years ago, wasn't it?
Maybe many years ago.
6 years ago or something, I'd like to say,
or
but that's a bit round. It might even be more than that. Yeah. But we didn't start working together till about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What is your background, Maya? Because I know that you also have your own business that is happy home working, right? So what is your background, Maya, and what is your background, Pilar?
Well, I started out working from home at the turn of the millennium, which is always very easy to date by the height of my millennium baby, who now towers over me. I've done lots of different roles working from home and building remote teams, but I've ended up full-time freelancing for the last 4 or 5 years, which is where I ended up having the pleasure of working with Pilar. Most of my work is writing and bits of consultancy and journalism. I set up Healthy Happy Home Working in response to the forced shift to remote last year to try and help the people who had wound up doing it maybe reluctantly, because what was interesting about the work with Virtual Not Distant was often it was something coming from the organization, and people who wanted to work from home, work remotely. It was often a privilege that they had to request and lobby for, and we helped them manage and transition into that. Suddenly there were all these people doing it without the benefit of that structured process that Pilar had been consulting on for so long. So I wanted to provide some content and advocacy for those people. So the two work really well together. There's the organisation side and the managers and the support they need. And then there's Healthy Happy Home Working for the people caught in the middle and trying to decide if it's what they want from their life at all at the moment.
Oh, fantastic. That's really amazing. And what is your background, Pilar? How did you move to the virtual space so many years ago, pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic. So my background is completely eclectic. So I did a science degree, then trained as an actress. I've been working as a voiceover artist for a few decades now. And I went into the leadership space because I saw that there were a lot of the things I was doing with our ensemble in the theatre company, which was, again, many years ago, that could transfer very well into corporate training. So I started to look at leadership training and seeing how I could bring my own experience of bringing people with me, and also all the stuff I'd learned about creating ensembles, so creating theatre groups. And so I went into leadership training, did a bit of that, met my husband in Holland. My father was very ill in Spain. So I was in that space. And that's how I ended up looking at, okay, what can I do online? And probably formed the company, I think, in 2016. Yeah.
So Virtual Not Distant, what is it about?
It's about reducing the sense of physical distance. So it really is about the fact that we can still build very strong connections as people, even though we're physically apart. Of course, we've got this kind of interaction, the real-time interaction, which has been made possible by a lot of technology becoming incredibly affordable and incredibly stable. Actually, let's not forget, it's only 5 or 6 years ago when we all turned off our cameras because we didn't have enough bandwidth. So it's about that, but it's also about what other things can we do to reduce that sense of distance and disconnection when we're not together in the physical space. So what we've been doing is training with managers and their teams, and we're now moving into how can companies use podcasting internally to keep their people connected, to continue building that sense of belonging. So we're really building on the virtual not distant tag.
Fantastic. And I just read recently when I was scrolling through your webpage, I saw that project. I found it fantastic. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
About?
The podcasting project, sorry.
The podcasting for connection. So it's a new service. Yeah. So the idea is what we've been seeing, especially during the pandemic, and it was mainly during the pandemic, is that sense of connection between people has mainly happened through meetings. And of course, that's exhausting. And we've been doing everything. We've been doing the work. We've been doing the social connection. We've been doing the supporting each other, the thinking out loud through meetings. And what we're looking at is using the medium of audio, the media of regular audio that we create regularly for our employees, by our employees, to bring culture into another space. Because when we talk about culture, many people immediately think an office together, things that happen when we're together, but there's a lot more around that. So podcasting for connection is about finding the pockets of people within your organization that want to come together and create something for the other employees. So it could be about sharing stories of celebration. It could be about sharing stories of how people are role modeling the values, etc.
Fantastic. I really love that. And when we talk about now, you were already mentioning thinking out loud. This topic today, also our discussion today, is around working out loud and visibility of teamwork. So Maya, have you been, when did you get introduced to working out loud?
Well, I think working out loud as a concept has been around for a long time in the virtual space, and particularly in the technical sector and programmers and agile people. There's an awful lot of open source sharing of what people are doing, and it's a very good way of bridging that virtual distance, of showing sort of almost what's happening in my head if I'm programming out loud, or sharing thoughts in a chat and so on. And I think the way that Pilar refined it and developed the visible teamwork model was to serve a broader base of knowledge workers and more complex projects, finding ways to make the work itself and the way we collaborate around it visible without quite so much noise as working out loud can suggest, a way to curate it around different objectives and around the work itself and the way we show up to each other within the work we do, and even more broadly outside of the team and even outside of the organization.
So when we talk about working out loud, Pilar, what is it that was for you missing there when it comes to visible team, or when you compare it to your framework, visible teamwork?
So the concept of working out loud that stuck with me, and I'm amazed at John Stepper. I'm like, is this whole concept of making visible the work in a way that is helpful to ourselves or others. And I love that definition. And but the problem with working out loud is it has the word loud in it. So immediately, and also for me, working out loud has that unidirectional connotation, because it's working out loud. I'm loud, you receive. So, I mean, this is all semantics. But also the visible teamwork, again, it's about understanding what aspects of teamwork we want to make visible. And we have to start to think, and then it's got the word team in it. So what was missing for me from the concept of working out loud is that there are other things about ourselves that affect our teamwork that might not fall strictly under working out loud. So I think that was the difference.
Do you too, as a team, apply visible teamwork? Or does it make sense for you to do that? Or is it too small of a number?
I'm going to say not much.
Yeah. No, I mean, we are a very small team. We have another collaborator as well, Becky. I think part of the problem is that Pilar and I are both writers, so we tend to stick to that channel a lot until we get on a call. But we don't tend to have the big complex collaborative projects. We don't have the issues about onboarding new people and things like that, where visible teamwork practices can be used very tactically in terms of your day-to-day running of the organization. And it's a flexible framework that can scale up for larger teams, whereas I think the two of us know each other so well and what we're doing, and we're both working on other things, and then we chat when we're working on virtual not distance stuff. It's a little bit less structured, to be fair.
Having said that, we do. I'm just trying to think through, because I was very quick to say no, because when I think visible teamwork, I think about all these things. I think visible teamwork is basically a collection of practices that we've come across. So a lot of them are not original from us. In fact, we use a lot of stuff that people are doing. So it's some principles, and then the principles are illustrated by practices. But for example, we do have a channel in Slack just called Presence, which is about whether we're there this week, what we're doing during the week, anything we need to know. That's part of deliberate communication. When we bring people in, like designers for the web or other collaborators, we have open channels in Slack that anyone, either Maya or Becky, can also join and look at. So it's very much, and this is very interesting because there's still a lot of people, even who work remotely, who are used to email. So there's also a whole education piece, even coming to working for virtual not distance as a freelancer. There is still that whole thing. And I have for ages been wanting to do how to use Slack in virtual not distant, because it's not really about the tool. It's about what we're doing and why we're doing it there. Why am I asking you to post in this space where 2-3 people more can see it, rather than continue with email together? So in a way, I'm missing that education piece. For our podcast, though, which is a very important part of Virtual Not Distant, the 21st Century Work Life, we do completely work in the open and communicate in the open with Ross, our engineer. So having said that we don't apply visible teamwork, that's not true, Pilar.
We do, yeah.
You see, but
Yeah.
I don't think of it as such a big thing now. So for that, we have Trello, which is so wonderful to see who's working on what. And the thing is that Trello works very well for the podcast because we each have our tasks. Our conversations are not complicated around it. We can have very short conversations in the cards. It's pretty much, I've done it. Is there a problem? Blah, blah, blah. We're not, it is. So that fits very well that. So for that process, yes. For others, very little.
Yeah, the podcast is a good example, I think.
Maya, when you're saying it's also fun to see how we at the end think that we don't use the tools we develop, but at the end, if we reflect upon it, we discover, okay, we do use it. Maya, you were saying about the podcast.
Well, I was just thinking that is actually a really good example of visible teamwork in lots of ways. But like Pilar, I kind of almost take it for granted because it's the way we've worked for so long. But it does actually demonstrate a lot of the aspects of it, the way that we have a visible workflow, and episode cards move from one side of the board to the other as they're being developed and worked on and uploaded and so on. Each board itself has checklists and a flow in it. So the state of the work itself is very transparent. We can communicate around it. We can see exactly who's done what the status is of any missing bit. There are key dates on it and so on. So it is probably a pretty good example, even though there's really only 3 of us working on it. It would scale if we needed to, if we were working with other collaborators, and it's a very transparent, open, deliberate system. So yeah, it's a good example, really.
And if you're on Trello, you can look for it in the podcast. If you're on Trello, we have a template now open for anyone to use.
Oh, fantastic! We definitely need to share that later on. We need to share that in the links of this episode of this show. Fantastic. And Pilar, one question about the framework in general. So visible teamwork. You already said a few things that differentiates you from working out loud with your framework. Can you get a little bit more in depth into the framework itself?
So it has 3 buckets. Call it like that. So we look at deliberate communication, work visibility, and planned spontaneity. And with each one, it's okay, what are we trying to do? Why are we making our teamwork visible? And what aspect of our teamwork are we making visible? And is it for productivity? Is it for alignment? Is it for connection? So these are all the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. So the first bucket is about the person. What do we need to know about each other that we might be missing out on because we're not together all the time? And that's called deliberate communication. Then we have work visibility, which is all about the work. And it includes things like visible workflow, which is the podcast thing, falls very well under that. Also open conversations, which is the concept of if I have a conversation with Maya, I have it in the open so other people can read it. And there's also the visible thinking, which is sharing some of our thoughts and having a way of doing that is structured. And then planned spontaneity is the whole concept that in the online space, unless we have a plan, we cannot be spontaneous. So it can be as simple and as having a virtual coffee. So that is once a week, you have that, and the spontaneity comes in who's going to turn up, what you're going to talk about, right, to paying attention in your technology, in your tools, for example. Is anyone else logged on at the same time as me? And being aware of that kind of stuff. But everything comes under the banner of, unless we've agreed on how we're going to work, these things are not going to happen. And then it's a question of picking which one is more important to us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one component that you already mentioned is deliberate communication. Could you maybe dive a little bit deeper into that? How can we foster that in our teams? What do we need to set up in terms of processes or structures or tools that we sort of enhance deliberate communication, Pilar?
So when we look at deliberate communication, we're talking about very simple things that we might not think of communicating explicitly. So for example, our mood. What kind of mood are we in today? And for example, I might want to communicate that I'm in a great mood. So sorry if I reply to all your messages with loads of emojis, but that's how I'm feeling today. Nothing's happened. And other things like availability. How available are you today for a chat, or how available are you to have a good conversation? And all of this is about setting up regular ways of doing this, so that, one, from the manager's point of view as well, and from our team members, we can see when a pattern is broken or when something is different. Because one of the things that we hear a lot is that, especially people during the pandemic actually, has been, I don't know if someone is not well because I don't have enough cues coming to me. So if we can set small, simple things that happen regularly, when that message starts to be a bit shorter, or when the cadence is not quite right, then something might be wrong. And then whether we pay attention to it or not is up to us. And then from the point of view of team members, also, it's about understanding things like context. So I could not, if we communicate once a week, for example, what's going on at home, if we're working from home, or what's going on in our country, if we're global, then it gives information to other people to have more information on how they can interact with us. That's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to help those interactions. And the one other piece from deliberate communication, which is especially pertinent in large organizations, is bringing in the information from what else is happening in the organization. Because this is stuff that we might pick up in the office when we're with other people, in the lift, whatever, in places with people from other teams. And our team members might not have that information. And unless we have a space, it's just not going to happen. So it really is about that, about formalizing, which is very difficult sometimes, information that otherwise we might just pick up spontaneously from each other.
Yeah, and particularly making space for that on hybrid teams, to include the people who are not there in the physical space, the things that we take for granted, from the gossip in the lifts to the body language in the office, finding a way to make that intentional within the virtual space, and recognizing that otherwise you're going to end up with two teams with very different communication experiences.
Absolutely. What I find so important is that sometimes, particularly in hybrid teams, if everybody's virtual, it's easier indeed to have that communication on an equal level for everyone.
Yeah.
But particularly in hybrid teams, it gets much more complicated, because all that office talk very often gets, like, maybe, 24 hours later to any kind of online communication channel, so that also your virtual team members get to know about whatever we are talking about in the office. So that's like a huge challenge. What do you think about channels here? If we just talk about tool, because you were already mentioning that you're working with Trello, you have your Slack channels. What would you suggest here to look into when it comes to deliberate communication, Maya or Pilar, whoever prefers that?
Well, shall I jump in and say it's about that intentionality and structuring it in the first place, and actually starting your deliberate communication with a very explicit agreement about how you're going to use those channels and why. Because if you don't have that, then people don't know whether the plan for the podcast is on an email or in a channel or on a Trello card or wherever, and you don't know where to look. And if you were in the office, you could sort of see where people's eyes were going or where they went for this meeting or whatever, and you could kind of pick it up from those around you. In the digital space, we have to signpost much more clearly. So in order to get that right from the start, we sometimes work with people to create team agreements about what kinds of communication they have, what kind of things they relate to, whether it's the activities or the projects or just the kind of social glue that we have, an informal communication, and how we're going to use each tool, and really to try and have as few tools and channels as possible, but no fewer. And then to have some kind of hygiene and maintenance of them. It might be an office manager or somebody with that particular mandate for communications, though I would argue it's a shared responsibility in the team, actually, to say, well, in the water cooler channel, we've drifted into talking about Project X. We really ought to take that over to that channel. Otherwise, somebody who's not here today might miss that. And this is actually getting really interesting and relevant. And to just kind of manage that and curate it a bit. It does take more deliberation than it would if you were all sitting around a break room together. It definitely does. So it just takes that little bit more effort, but then the rewards from having those conversations captured and managed in that way will serve the work and the team and the individuals in ways that make it very much worthwhile to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important to continuously revise how we're using them and whether we're using them in the way we were intending, because these things, if not, they drift off and suddenly it all falls apart. So going back to tools, well, we have the Office as a collaboration tool. That is one collaboration tool in hybrid. And I think this is really important, just going back on that when we start on a hybrid, working in a hybrid way, so using the office and mainly the home or maybe other places, that we think of ourselves as a remote team. Because at the end of the day, we're knowledge workers, which I think is most of the audience that we're speaking to when we're talking about hybrid. If we're knowledge workers, we're all on the computer. We do the work on our computer. And that is the shared space. The office is not the shared space all the time, but the online space is. Even if you're in the office, you are online. So if we can start thinking of ourselves as a remote team that uses the office as another collaboration tool, then we start to level those places. So, and then as to what tools for what, there's tools that are built for project management. So those are great for workflow. There's tools that are built for capturing notes. So for example, OneNote, Evernote, they're great for thinking out loud or sharing your thoughts and capturing them. So you have some team memory. And then there's places like the Slack or Teams, which are probably something for more fast conversations. So just look at what the tool has been designed to do, decide how you want to use it, and review.
I just want to pick up on one thing that you were saying, and I just had very recently a discussion about that. Team agreements that are so important for any kind of team, but particularly for virtual or hybrid teams. So what is your experience with organizations? How do they really work with team agreements? Do they have them in place nowadays, 1 year after working completely virtual in a chaos, most of them? So what is your experience there?
They're there, but they're not used.
Yeah. Some of them aren't there at all either for the ones that had to change everything. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think what's happened, I've just been working over a year with a small team, a team of 12 people. And they'd actually been working online as a virtual team for ages. They just didn't call themselves that. And what is really important is even if we just get to have that conversation towards the agreement, the conversations that come up while drafting that document are gold. They're golden. And they're probably conversations we needed to have ages ago. So that's the first thing, is not to get too hung up on the document. And then the important thing is to come back to the document, because I have worked in teams that had something in the team agreement, came back to it and went, hang on, you're not doing that anymore. So review it, and review it with the eye of, where did we come? Oh, we've moved on. We work differently. What's changed? So I think the document is another tool, actually.
Totally agree. Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Let me ask you one question, Maya, about, I was really, I liked how you wrote, both of you, about planned spontaneity. So why is that so important when it comes to visible teamwork, Maya?
Well, it sounds like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? But
totally.
They always go together. But that's part of the contradictory nature of the online space, I think, that nothing happens unless we make it so. And that includes spontaneous things. We have to create structures and spaces for people to be spontaneous in. So that might mean something as simple as quite informal channels within our collaboration tools, places that we can talk about not work things in a quite deliberate way. It might mean finding little ways to connect around the work itself, like a little bit of informality at the beginning and end of a meeting, rather than dragging everybody into another meeting after work to do a quiz or whatever. Why not build those kind of a few minutes into the work time that you're doing already, because we all do enough of this screen to screen business during the work itself. It might mean pairing people up for random virtual coffees with each other, or, as Pilar suggested earlier, setting up a room with a theme and then just see who drops in or who doesn't. Depending on the size of the team and the complexity of the relationships, there are different things you can do. In fact, there are even some tools, like there's a thing you can get for Slack that randomly puts people in pairs. So you get a chance. Yes, that's the one. So you can just have a chat with somebody in a large organization. You might have no overlap with work-wise, and they're nothing more to you than a little icon on a chat, because you're not going to bump into them in the lift. So it's quite nice to use these tools that are starting to emerge to group people up. And there are lots of ways of doing it. You can connect over things that are nothing to do with work at all. You know, it's great to see teams sort of having book clubs in their Slack and things like that, and just different ways that people can find shared interest and connection and develop those relationships. There are also planned spontaneity facilities, if you like, within some of the collaboration tools we use. Like, often Pilar and I will collaborate on a Google Doc, and it's just nice to see somebody's face pop up next to a comment or something, especially if they're actually in there at the same time and you can see them. You almost want to wave at your screen because it's like, oh, we're both working on this together, even though we're in different countries. And so if we select tools like that, which have those little human touches in it, Trello as well, I think shows you when someone is commenting, and you can see actually we are working together on this. We're not even doing it synchronously. It's not like we've both agreed to be in this Trello card at the same time, but the fact is there's this sense of connection and alignment because we're both engaged in it and thinking about it at the same time, even if we don't actually speak synchronously at that moment. So there are lots of little ways that you can be spontaneous and connect with the people that you're working with remotely, but you do need to kind of engineer those into the system so that they happen. And that's what planned spontaneity is all about.
And what is your experience now? So I've seen last year, for example, because you talk also about planning that into your schedule. And what we have seen, of course, last year is there are so many meetings. Many were going through a meeting marathon because we all know the problem, the challenges of synchronous and asynchronous communication that we were not able to manage properly. But how do you feel our organizations handling nowadays, this year already, with this planned spontaneity, Maya?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of places still need to catch up with this bit because it's not part of the emergency, keep the plane in the air when we have a crisis. Then we went to synchronous meetings all the time, Zoom fatigue, everybody burned out, no one's got time to do the work because we're so busy talking about it. And then can you come to another social thing after work as well, even though you now want to throw your laptop out the window? So people aren't really doing these things yet as well as they could be, but it desperately needs to be part of a sustainable strategy for ongoing remote working and particularly hybrid working to ensure that we don't end up with a two-tier, two-team system. We really need to be building these things in to keep teams connected to one another. And it does need to be part of that transition into something a bit more sustainable. I don't think after whatever it is, 15 months now, we can still say we're in an emergency firefighting mode. I think it really is time for teams to be considering their tech, their well-being, things like that you can maybe try and work around in an emergency, when now we need to start looking at those things so that we can do something that's going to last going forward. I'm not going to use the phrase new normal because Pilar hates it. We all hate it. And we're not new, we're not normal yet. There's still a long way to go, and there's a lot more change to go. I think we need to accept that, and that it's taken a toll on people. So we really need those human things to get us through this. It's not over yet. Change is still happening. So we need those points of connection.
I think it's also important to remember that the planned spontaneity doesn't mean we have to be spontaneously together in the same time. So even just having a space where I can give kudos to my team member in a Slack channel, and then someone else can pick it up hours later. But the spontaneity comes from, oh, I really want to thank Maya. You have somewhere to go. You don't have to hold on until you're with your teammates. There's somewhere to go. So building an asynchronous and more formal process around what is very human and spontaneous process can help to make it sustainable as well.
And those kudos cards are just fantastic. They are so lovely to share a thank you in whatever form you want to share it, because they have several different layouts as well, right?
Yeah.
We've seen teams have lots of different creative solutions for that as well, and specific ways of bigging each other up in, well, for anything from an emoji to a formal channel for celebrating each other, and encouraging people to celebrate themselves as well for the wins that no one else witnesses.
Yes.
Say, yay, I did a thing.
Even if it's not visible, right?
Yeah, you can make it visible.
That's good. And I think one thing that we're definitely picking up in one of the upcoming Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Lives with Maya is going to be happy, healthy, or healthy, happy home working. So that is something that we are going to discuss in an upcoming live session. Definitely. Let me ask you one final question before we're getting to the end. Time is flying. It's amazing. Let me ask you maybe a question that could have been also used to start this conversation with, but maybe I wanted to put it at the end to sort of end with this important aspect of visible teamwork. Why is it important to share not just your work, but how you work within the organization? Pilar, what is your take on this?
It makes us more personal, more human. So it's at the heart of that. If I share my thinking process, you get to know me a little bit better. And also I get to reflect on who I am, because in sharing that, I also discover some stuff, especially with taking the time. So I think it's all about celebrating the fact that we each bring something different to the table, and that actually by putting it there out to the team, that we can actually get to learn to get to know each other a little bit better.
Fantastic.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think that when we do that, we make ourselves a little bit vulnerable when we share something that's not quite finished, not quite done, it's a little bit nascent, and we might be uncertain about it ourselves. But if we can be in a team where it's psychologically safe to do that, and know that we can receive constructive feedback, we can actually make something better, and we can really bring out the best, which is kind of greater than the sum of its parts, when people can really bring all of their ideas forward and synergize and co-create and get rid of the rubbish along the way, because not every idea is brilliant. It just needs space, and sometimes you need a second opinion on it, and you just need a different perspective. And to be able to share that in a team is actually wonderful and amazing. And there's no reason that a virtual team can't cultivate that kind of culture and safe space in order to do that and really do their best work together.
So when you now, and this is now really the last question, but I need to ask that one, when you start working with an organization on visible teamwork, let's say it's an organizational process, HR is contacting you, we want to have the visible teamwork sort of embedded in our thinking, in our culture. Where do you start, Pilar, with your projects? What's the way to go there? What do you do? Do you start, well, from the top, I assume, but how do you do it with managers, with employees? Is it training program? Is it big intervention that you're doing? What is it?
It depends. It depends. So it sometimes it's training for managers, because they're the ones that are looking after the team process. It could be working with the team directly. And it's usually that if the call is from HR, it's usually about training. And the training is just about mindset, because you cannot change everything, and especially now to our online workshop. But it's really about the concept, some of the concepts and some of the ideas, or going in there with the team and going, okay, let's start with the team agreement. What are we missing? What's the tech that could help us, where the gaps are? And let's start to look at that. So in lots of different ways.
Cool. Maya, last question here. If you think about your work with Pilar and with the other virtual teams that you're connected with, what is it that holds you together? Because as we start the conversation, there are many sort of organizations and individuals thinking we cannot connect really properly through the virtual space. I'm also not a believer of that, because I do think it's also that is of mindset. But what is it that connects you? What are you doing to connect you and keep you connected with your virtual team colleagues?
That's a really interesting question. And I think probably communication is at the heart of it. To the point of over communication at times in terms of the work. And there's that facilitation saying of say what you're going to do and then do it, and then say what you've said and just keep sending that message home. That's really important. But building those relationships using the technology that we've got. We are so lucky that this happened now instead of 10 years ago, in terms of the richness and the multimedia, the fact that we can have synchronous video and broadcast it to the world, or we could have a private call. We've got so many different ways we can use these. We're not limited to just typing each other emails or sending each other Slack messages. You know, we try to, even within Virtual Not Distant, we try to use asynchronous audio and things like that to send each other thoughts and remarks, and to just use the richness of the tools that we have to develop those relationships. Because at the end of the day, people work with people, people trust people, people collaborate with people, and we have to find ways to bring those people together in a safe and enjoyable way within the work and around the work. And as long as we do that, it doesn't matter where we are, it doesn't matter how physically distant we are, we can be close and we can work well together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pilar and Maya, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your framework, and for sharing all your sort of knowledge that you built up through the past years for Virtual Not Distant. With that, I'm really thanking you again. It was a pleasure having you with us. And you don't forget, I have a virtual cocktail prepared backstage. So I see you there in a bit.
See you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye. And don't forget, follow Pilar and Maya on virtualnotdistant.com. Both of them were also tagged here in the post on LinkedIn. You can find them, follow them. Very valuable and interesting input and content that you can get by following Pilar and Maya. With that, I'm closing today's Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much for being with us. And don't forget, we are streaming every week. Next week, we are back on Thursday. So we are playing around a little bit to sort of fit better your schedule. Next week, we are live on Thursday with Karen Reed to talk on how to rock your virtual presentation. And with that, I'm thanking you. And don't forget to become a virtual space hero. Bye.